Howdy, this is Marty, again with Excellence in Education, and we're going to be continuing our discussion on learning styles. In the previous videos, we have been talking about the overview, and then our last video was on modalities. Today, I want to discuss a very important, in fact, I consider this the most important aspect of learning styles, and that is your learning personality, or how the world really sees us. And this is called dispositions. Now, it's first you gotta know is that dispositions tend to be hardwired, just like your personality is hardwired. Now, it can change over time depending upon certain environmental factors like a stressful situation or a disastrous part of your life, but for the most part, your dispositions, as with your personality, stays pretty constant. And what we want to know is that dispositions will affect how you behave and how you learn. So let's go on and talk about why disposition understanding is important. If you do not know your dispositions, then two individuals with different types of dispositions can have a conflict. And conflict always causes separation. So how do we cure that? We cure it partly due to the fact that if we understand each other's dispositional behaviors, especially in the learning style components we're talking about today, that we can avoid that conflict, which avoids the separation, which brings us back together into harmony. And an example of that is that there's a particular disposition where if the person says, let's meet in 10 minutes, and the other person says, fantastic, see you in 10 minutes. Well, if you're a particular person of a particular disposition called producing, you will be there at 10 minutes, plus or minus 2 seconds. But if you're of different personality, dispositional behavior, guess what? You're not going to be there in 10 minutes. It might be 15, 20, maybe as far as 30 minutes. Now, the person who thinks and is there in 10 minutes, they're going to be disappointed, if not totally upset, because you're late. But if they understand why you're late, then the frustration is somewhat lessened through understanding. Now, what's really, really, really important is to understand that within the pyramid of life, safety is utmost important. And a child, a student, really needs to feel acceptance and acknowledgement. This is going to go on for life. And remember, the hierarchy of needs, safety and security are on the very top. And if we don't have that, then what happens is, let's say the child, because we have two dispositionally different people, the teacher not understanding the child's behavior because of that dispositional behavioral component, they start getting upset with the child, they start medicating the child, they don't understand. What happens is then that sense of safety is destroyed. And when that sense of safety is destroyed, then we get into the body producing noradrenaline, which is a stress hormone. And when that happens, then the child or the person starts thinking about their own position, their own safety, and they start stressing out, and they do not spend any time being concerned about learning, because that noradrenaline drug or that hormone is flowing through their system, because now we have violated their sense of safety. So, if we understand why certain kids behave the way they do, remember when we talked about the tactile kinesthetic child and the whole body movement person, they need to be in motion? Well, if the teacher understands that, then they can go, well, just walk back and forth in the room. But if they don't understand that, then we have a child consumed with their discomfort, and they're there physically, but they're not there mentally. The same go for dispositions. If you have a particular disposition with a teacher, and it's different than the child, and there's no understanding, then we have conflict. And we don't want conflict, because conflict normally ends up with separation. And then we take our mind away from learning and is always put into that self-preservation mode. Okay, now what we're going to do is talk about in this video 5 different dispositions. The top one, and I won't say the top one, but the first one I'm going to talk about is performing. And that is represented by a person who needs to be in movement. The second one we'll be talking about in depth now is producing. And that's the person who's very organized. Then we have the inventing disposition, which is primarily that of a person who likes to discover things. Then we're going to talk about relate inspired, and those are the people who like to interact, and they love peace, by the way. They really don't like conflict. And then we're going to talk about the think create person, and that's the person who tends to be on the artistic side, the creative side. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend time on each one of those dispositions. And we're going to cover what it means, how to interact with that kind of person, and ideas on how to give them a very good environment so that learning is the primary input for that time period, not self-preservation and not inward thinking about frustration and all that. So again, we're going to be talking about those 5 different dispositions. So we'll continue with the first one, performing. Well, the good old performing disposition. What a great group of people these are. Now, to get along with a performing dispositional behaviored person, you gotta acknowledge that their need for spontaneity and playfulness is extremely high. If they don't feel that they're being acknowledged, and if they don't think that their needs are being met, then they can get into a little bit of a downer. But if you just acknowledge it, wow, they can be a lot of fun. Now, oftentimes they are known as the class clown. Who's known the class clown? Everybody, because there's always one around. And these class clowns, they can be hyperactive, they can be disruptive. And this is where we get into a problem, because a lot of times the classroom environment dictates more of a calm environment, or that parent, they want to have a period of time when there are no disruptions, that they can talk to that child, they can interface with them in an academic manner. But their dispositional behavior, those who are perform, it's very difficult. And unfortunately, what happens to a child who's part of a classroom environment? Whoa, they come in and they pharmaceutically attack them. In goes the medication, down goes the spontaneity, down goes the playfulness, down goes their inner soul. Because now you've destroyed what is important to them. You've destroyed what makes them work and what makes them go, what makes them want to live. So when we disrupt that cycle by using medications, we can have great challenges that are unintended. Now, yeah, they can be in trouble all the time, but you know, that's their playful nature. Now, here's the fun part about it. A lot of people who are in this performing disposition, they end up being very, very wealthy people. I mean, look at all these performers, these actors, these actresses. I mean, Robin Williams, can you imagine having him in your classroom? Even Oprah Winfrey or people like that. I'm sure that if you were to talk to their teachers back in elementary and junior high, high school, man, there'll probably be notes. Too much disrupting, class clown, disruption. So, you know, that's the nature of the beast. But we need to be very careful in our interaction with performing people that we do not act in a way that destroys them. Again, remember, they need to be recognized for their spontaneity and their that can be a challenge, because then people go, well, you know what? They're not serious. They're always changing their mind. Again, if you understand the need for spontaneity and playfulness, we would do much, much better. Now, they also like to challenge the norm. They can always be outspoken. Now, and they'll contest authority. There's no problem with that. And so this is where their life can be somewhat difficult. And then you have to look at what are their learning characteristics. What is it that you can provide them that will make them really want to learn, to really be part of the learning process? Well, one, present it in an entertaining way. Sitting there for a 35, 40-minute presentation where it's just boring, like doing the Pythagorean theorem in math, I am sure they're not too excited about that. So if there's a way to provide an entertaining component, wow, then you're on your way to really connecting with that particular disposition. Second of all, they need to have variety. Their attention span can be very short term. And that's why they're called attention deficit sometimes, hyperactive. But the deal is, if you can give them variety, whoa, that can be fantastic. They need to have that hands-on movement, perform, just get them involved with games, get them involved with movement, because that's real important. And please, short-term sessions, wowee, that is so important. Keep it to about 15-20 minutes, and you have a far more effective environment that they will learn. They need to have what I would consider sensory breaks about every 15 to 20 minutes. And that just could be 5 minutes of getting up, walking around, whatever. They love sports, they love games, they love field trips, and kind of they're ideal for, to some degree, the Charlotte Mason approach to homeschooling, that real world experiences. Instead of being in totally classroom, they're out on field trips, they're out in the real world experimenting and having a pretty good time doing that. Now, areas of growth that we have to be concerned about is they really don't really enjoy following a schedule. They're not very orderly. And when you have an environment that's based upon, especially the classroom, or if you as a parent are what we call that producer, which we'll get into soon, and that is schedule, there's going to be conflict. And we have to be careful about that. Now, they always need to have changing subject, change this, change that. That's part of that desire for spontaneity. That's that desire for variety. So if you can address that, again, using short-term teaching periods, and you can change subjects, can be beneficial. Now, they're not good at problem solving. Now, why is that? Because it takes too long. Pure and simple. They get anxious, they get bored, they go, I gotta move on. And that's why they have challenges in solving problems. And commitments are sometimes very difficult for them. They cannot commit to a particular project for very long. Maybe even gets down into personal relationships. They cannot be committed for long term. Maybe that's why these actors and actresses have so many short-term marriages. I don't know. But now, what's important is how can we provide a curriculum that will satisfy their dispositional needs and expectations. And one is just, again, like we said earlier, real life, always on the move. Move, act, do. I mean, that's just perfect. If you can find a way where they can perform a skit to learn something, if you can involve sports to learn, like math facts, if you can involve activities to learn math, like designing a skateboard, find out the distances between the trucks and whatnot, and all these things can be exciting. Then we can also use filmmaking. Oh my gosh, what a perfect thing for that. And we have seen where instead of saying to a child who's perform oriented, say, I want you to write a 5-page essay on this particular subject, you can very easily go, hey, why don't you make a 15-minute film on this subject? And I'll guarantee you, man, they're going to be in hog heaven. They're going to be excited, and they're going to say, yes, I can do that. Now you've accomplished their goal. They have learned to do the research. They have learned to put information together. They have learned to assess the information. They have learned to present the information. Just that one person will take the written form and the other person will take a video text or a video format. And they both have achieved the same end result of learning and presenting. And that is where your creativity can come into very, very important consideration when you are dealing with a dispositionally behaved person. So again, have fun with them. Realize that if you do it right, your son or daughter can be a great actor. They can end up being a great trial lawyer, even a preacher, a politician. They're always in the form of acting. And this is where you can benefit by allowing your child to benefit from the fact that you understand. So, again, the performing disposition, lots of fun, spontaneous and playful. Now let's go on to our next disposition. Okay, let's talk about the producer now. This is a very important disposition. In fact, this is a disposition that is really desired in the world because of the fact of their behaviors and their characteristics. Now, in order to get along with a producing disposition, it is important for you, the person, to recognize their need for order and efficiency. Now, their reputation is such that they tend to be very, very neat people, and they can sit for a long time. I mean a long time, hours at times. And they love to complete things, to check off the box. Boy, I tell you what, if you really want to have a happy camper who's a producer, give them a workbook and give them a list of boxes to check off, and they are happy. In fact, they're the ideal student that the classroom desires. Do you realize that there's only about 8 to 16% of the students are producers, which, let's say you have a class of 35 kids, that's going to be 3 or 6 kids. But the entire structure of the classroom is geared toward that producing disposition. Now think about that. Wow. And that's an important thing to remember in a few seconds, and I'll tell you why. Now, they also like to get things done on time and on budget. If you're in the business world, on budget, on time, very, very important. And then they thrive on planning, organizing, and just making things move in a forward direction toward completion. Now, you ask yourself, hey, where do these people end up going? Well, they go in the business world, a lot of them. In fact, one of the most important people in a corporate structure is that executive secretary who's high in producing skills, because that's the person who's going to allow the whole environment of that office to seek perfection, to seek timeliness, to seek completion, to seek an organized manner by which to run the business. So do not ever underestimate the power of the good executive secretary, or just a plain old secretary as well in a smaller business. But again, all these things in the business world that require all the organizational skills, the timeliness, on budget, on time, this is where the producing person really can thrive. Now, what are some of the challenges for these particular individuals? Well, sometimes they tend to score artificially high on the assessment. And you say, what? I thought you told me earlier that these are built-in characteristics. They're just hardwired. Well, in 80%, which is 4 out of the 5 dispositions, this is very true. But on this particular disposition, it's amazing, because don't forget, that classroom is designed for a producer. And so you're being taught every day for 12 years to check off the box, be on time, sit there for long time periods. And 55 minutes is a long time, okay, for a lot of kids. And to have a highly structured life. These are all the things that are characteristic of a producing individual. So in order to just survive your school and even survive within the society, people will sometimes develop skills of the producer, but they may not necessarily inside be a producer. They're compensating. And this is why it's very important to look at the assessment of that person and go, what is their second highest dispositional score? And you look at that and see where they relate. And if you see another score within 4 or 5 points of that producing score, if that producer is the dominant one, then you gotta seriously look at that second score as being a great indicator of where that person's real disposition is, not that compensation disposition that they learn in both the classroom or the workforce. Alrighty. Sometimes they get so excited about completing the schedule, checking off the boxes, that the thrill comes in not learning about something, but completing it. And therefore, they may rush through things without mastery. And that can be a challenge later on in life, especially. And also, what happens too is they tend to be legalistic. They get so caught up on the rules and the organizational that, wow, guess what? You gotta do it this way. You can't deviate. They don't like to deviate. Forget that. And also, if you really want to, if you have a child or even yourself, before you go to bed, a producer needs to know what's happening the next day. I have a daughter who's very high in producing, and she really wants to know what the schedule is the next day. And she's got a couple of kids who are like that too. If you're a producer and you have no idea what's happening that day when you wake up, you know what? Even that third cup of coffee is not going to help, because you don't know the future, and you need to know what's going to happen in the future. And that's that short-term future called from the time you wake up till the time you have dinner. Okay, let's talk about learning characteristics, okay? They prefer, again, a structured environment. They love sequential and orderly events. That's why they do very well in chapter books, because you start at page 1 or chapter 1 and you proceed in an orderly timeline toward completing the book. They love planning, and what really turns on, especially the younger producing students, let's say the elementary school kids, they love workbooks, because they can go and say, look it, I finished it, because the finish is what their goal is. Not so much mastery, but I finished my workbook. And don't forget that classroom environment designed for that producer. Okay, let's get into contributions that these people might bring in to your life or to society. And for one, they will bring in order and routine. There's very little chaos. If you have the ideal producer that had control of the world, there'll be zero chaos. There'll be just orderly. And they are also extremely reliable. And very much they want to follow the rules. In fact, this could be a problem, and I'll talk about that a little bit later on. And most valuable disposition in society is the producing person, because of all the orderly and the follow the rules type of behavior they exhibit, and they're able to make things happen. Whereas let's say the invent person, he may have the idea but doesn't have the capability sometimes to follow it to completion, and that's where a producer would become a benefit to that invent personality. All right, areas of growth. What are some of the other challenges? Well, one, they can be very rigid, very legalistic, and that can sometimes convert to being very controlling. And don't forget, our other dispositions, like that perform person, they don't want to be controlled. They want to be spontaneous. They want to just go, "Whoa, let's do this." But that producer says, "No, no, no. No, we have this schedule we got to fit." Okay, then they can choose, in many cases, rules over people. So there are times when you hear that office gossip, but oh man, that person who's a producer, they're horrible. They have no feeling. All they're concerned about is the goal, goal. And they have sometimes challenging friendships because they are more concerned about the rules than they are about people, therefore relationships. And they also, if they get too caught up in their perform, in their job or duties, they can start to sacrifice their health because they're more concerned about getting it done than adding balance to their life, taking times off, maybe taking a longer lunch break, even taking a short coffee break. They just work themselves through. So that can be a very, very negative component to being a real strong producer. Okay, let's talk about the curriculum. What is it that would really be beneficial to the student? And that is very simple, because the classroom's designed for producers, but anything that requires a time deadline, just go, "Yes, I need a deadline. Don't say, "Just get it done." Say, "You got to get it done by Monday afternoon at 3 p.m. Structure is very important. Workbooks, fantastic, because again, it shows page after page after page of completion, which is what they really, really love. They also do very well with multiple choice and fill in the blank type of questions. Not maybe so much with essay questions, but if they can fill in the blank and also do the multiple choice, then they will tend to be very happy. But again, when you look at the different levels of learning, which will be a different video that we'll be doing, they only get to level 2 or 3. They don't get all the way to level 4 because they're more concerned about the structure. So mastery, 100% mastery, may not be part of their success. Memorization is something that's really, really, really awesome for them. So research papers, graphing, outlines, resumes, writing recipes, brochures, all these things come into play. Actually, other things that come into play are contracts, petitions, statements of rights, all these things that require an organizational component, have rules and regulations. So again, these are the things that really drive the curriculum and drive the producing personality. Again, they can be phenomenal in the classroom. They tend to be that A student, especially in elementary and junior high. They tend to be fantastic in the business world, but they can also be very difficult to deal with because they're too rigid and too legalistic. So sometimes that perform personality we talked about earlier will have a hard time being real good buddies with a producer because they clash on the spontaneity components. One wants structure, one could care less. So again, I hope you've learned something on the producing disposition. So let's go ahead and go to our next disposition, okay? Alrighty, it's time to get into our next disposition, which will be inventing. And the important part about the inventing disposition, or discover if you would, is to recognize their need, and it's a very important need for them, is to recognize their need for intellectual stimulation, competence, and a chance to make a practical contribution. That is what they always live for. And it is very important that they understand that you understand them, because they can be a rather challenging dispositional person to deal with, because they get so involved in their discovery and in their pursuits of inventing that they tend to not have the greatest relationships with people. We'll get into that a little bit later on. Now, their reputation is such that they're concerned with their inventions. Nothing else matters. Nothing. I mean, it is just that project and nothing else. They are also known to be know-it-alls. And in a classroom environment, especially a few years ago, they were always called the nerds. And we know that the nerds have become more and more recognized as being fantastic people, but still there are those interesting components about the inventing personality or disposition that we need to take care of. Okay? Generally speaking, they become the scientists of the world. They become engineers, architects, even mechanics and handymen, because all these different professions and vocations are always looking for a new way to do it. How can we make it better? They're not overly concerned with how it looks, if it's more efficient or whatever. It's just as simple as, how can we make it better? What can we do to solve this problem? And all of these different professions and vocations, they kind of go around into that area. Take your mechanic, for example. Your car is not working properly. It's a puzzle to make the proper diagnosis. Well, see, he's in that invent process. The handyman, oh my gosh, I got a very good friend that is a handyman. And he is the most innovative person I know. I mean, he can find fantastic solutions for some of the simplest problems. And that is the fun part about my good friend, the handyman guy. Okay, so now let's talk about, well, what's their challenges? Yeah, okay, they do have some challenges. They're easily consumed with their projects. So much so that they forget about people, they forget about being on time, they forget about even their health. Oh my gosh. And they can have some serious problems with relationships, because everything is around their project. And if their son has a soccer ball game, or their daughter has a gymnastics program that they would love their daddy to go to, well, they can be known to just go, I'm too busy, I can't make it. Or they'll say, I'll be there, but they get consumed in the project, that they get lost in time. And that's one of the negatives about, well, it's not a negative, but it's a situation that occurs quite frequently with this inventing disposition, is that people will get lost in time. You know what that means? That means your attention deficit, as far as the establishment, the school system, the educators feel. Because, boom, you get lost in time, your attention deficit, boom, you can inject stuff into you. Now, that could be a problem, just like the think create person or the perform person. Okay? Now, what's fascinating too is that they do not sometimes take care of their health. And that's a challenge. And also, where the challenge comes in for parents and teachers is that a lot of times that invent person will start asking questions. And sometimes the questions appear not to be related to the subject. And the teacher may say, you're not listening, Johnny. When in actuality, he was listening, but that lecture or that thought process from the teacher stimulated a curiosity in his brain, which caused him to want to ask a question. A little bit still related to what the teacher's talking about, but not what the teacher thinks he was talking about. So that becomes problematic, and it gets irritating for the teacher. And then when we get home, a lot of times parents get exasperated, if you would, when their daughter or son, who's part of that invent disposition, they keep on asking questions. Well, how come this is happening? Why, Daddy? Why? And the questions just keep on going. And you know what? The poor dad, he's just come home from a long day at the office or maybe a business trip, and he's not in the mood for all these questions. So that can be a challenge, because those questions, as any parent knows with a small toddler that's always asking why, it can be time consuming and exasperating. So these are some of the challenges that we have to take in consideration. And sometimes they also can be way too serious about themselves because they're so consumed with their project. Okay, now let's look at what kind of learning characteristics or what kind of environment is best for these individuals. One, there needs to be a learning environment at home or at school, but it's easier at home, believe it or not, to give them time to explore. They do not need to be on a structured course of study. If they get caught up in a project, wow, let them explore, let them invent. I mean, there are some fantastic stories about people who have made great progress in life, and they spent their time tearing things apart as a teenager. And now as adults, they're making great money because they've invented certain things, because they were given the chance to take things apart, disassemble them, try to find out how to make them even better. The environment must be inspirational. They really need mental stimulation, and they need to be inspired all the time. They are not going to be sitting there watching TV. They may not know much about sports and all the things that are happening in the world because they're too busy wanting to be curious and wanting to investigate. We need to also have an environment that provides new solutions. There might be problems or situations or conditions where there are solutions already, but guess what? They don't want the status quo solution. They want to be given the freedom and the inspiration and the latitude to make a new solution, to make a better solution, that proverbial pursuit of the better mousetrap. And so also we have to have a situation where they are able to ask questions and not be held back because they ask questions. And they have to be able to discover and design things. So that's basically the ideal environment, an environment that is not time driven. That is so important. And flexible and encourages discovery. So now we have discussed the inventing disposition, and it holds a lot of the similar characteristics that the perform does, not in that they're moving all the time, but they do tend to get lost in time. They get overly involved in their projects, and they can be phenomenal contributors to society, especially in the technical areas of society. And they can be quite interesting people to talk to. Oh my goodness. I mean, corner them at a party, if they even go to the party, that is, and talk about their discoveries, their fascination with mechanical things or other items that need to be improved. Well, again, I hope that this has helped you out, and I hope that now you understand more about the inventing/discover disposition, which is a phenomenal disposition to have, but a difficult one to live with. Okay, take care now, and we'll go on to the next disposition. Okay, let's get now to relate and inspire. Basically, the people who love to interact. And we all know people like that. Now, here's the fun part. In order to really appreciate these people and what they really, really strive for is that you acknowledge their need to contribute to the well-being of others. Translation, if they love harmony and if they see two people having a discussion or an argument, then they want to intercede. They want to bring a resolution to the conflict. And this is the type of personality you're talking about. Kumbaya becomes their kind of favorite word. And they don't like stressful situations. They don't like it when people are not in a harmonious, united way. So again, these people, if you recognize their need for making a contribution to the well-being of others, it's going to be fantastic. Now, what's their reputation all about? Basically, they're all about fairness. And again, like I mentioned earlier, they love to resolve issues between people. It's very important in the creation of harmony. And they can be very kind, they can be very thoughtful, and they can be pretty much a team player. And they love group things, so therefore the team component. Now, what are some of the challenges that these individuals have because of this massive desire for harmony? One, they can sometimes neglect themselves in the objective of achieving harmony. For instance, they could sacrifice even some of their own standards if it would bring peace. Now we know that that may not always work in the long term, but that's where they come from. They are very, very sensitive to getting hurt. They're easily hurt, their feelings, if they're not recognized as being part of the team and part of the resolution process. And they can, like I said, sacrifice standards, sacrifice a lot. Now another little side note is that they can be rather chatty. And this can be a disruptive thing in the classroom because they'll be more involved in the interaction component of their grouping, the classroom, instead of paying attention to the teacher. At home, they tend to get very involved in conversations with other people via the telephone. So lots of telephone time, and sometimes they will neglect the family in order to be part of a resolving component of people outside the family. So again, we got to be careful. They will also sometimes be late or even forget about appointments if they feel they have a greater purpose to be relating to other people or resolving issues between two different parties. Again, this is their massive desire for harmony. Okay, now what kind of people do these individuals become? Well, you know, when you look out there with society, you see a lot of nurses because they have compassion, they want harmony. You'll find a lot of teachers, preachers. You might even find counselors, because counselors in the field of psychiatry, psychology, if not just family counselors, they want to bring that togetherness, that harmony, that connectivity between two different parties. Okay, let's get down to what type of learning environment is best for them. Well, start off with, of course, they prefer activities that are group type activities that are social in nature. Again, they're very social people. They want to interact. Interaction is one of their biggest desires, and they love to be involved with human behavior, and whether it's human behavior in resolving issues, whether it's human behavior in attacking a problem, a political issue, a social issue. In fact, many of the people probably in the political arena are relate inspire people because their objective is to help resolve issues within society. And we find a lot of these individuals who take up causes. Whether or not they think the cause through or not, that's a different issue, but this is a driving nature of that particular person if they get involved in political or social causes. Okay, the curriculum can be a challenge because sometimes they don't want to be involved with the curriculum because they're more involved with, quote, the social issues. But we can incorporate some ideas into bringing these people into the curriculum arena. And one way is to have collaborative or group activities and group discussions. Put them in a small group, they're in heaven. Instead of sitting there in a lecture and they're one of 35 individuals who are expected to be quiet, give them a group of 3, 4, 5 people and discuss the subject, and we're into a pretty good deal. Now for the homeschooler, this can be exciting because most homeschool families are anywhere from 4 to 6, 7 individuals, some as high as 10. But again, that's a relatively small group. If you incorporate the group concept into your homeschool activities, you'll retain the attention of that Relate Inspire student far more. You can, for instance, learn history. Instead of going through a textbook with one fact after another date, teach history and other subjects through stories, whether it be stories written in a book, whether it be stories from grandfather, whether it be stories in a TV or a movie, a DVD. They can really relate to stories far more than they can hard, cold facts. Again, also, another idea is to provide them with a learning partner. It could be a one-on-one, one-on-two type of partnership, but again, let them have that group thing. Now, let's say you're studying for a test. How best could they learn to master the material? One way is to provide them with an imaginary artist or imaginary audience. And maybe for a smaller child, line up their little play puppets and whatnot, their dolls. But they're going to be giving a presentation to their audience in the format of solving a problem. And in the problem-solving process, they will have to know all the information, present the information, and this way they become much more knowledgeable about the material they're supposed to learn. And this works especially well if they're high on Relate Inspire, but also high on, let's say, Perform. And again, remembering the Perform disposition, we talked about people acting out to other people as in a play or a drama or a reenactment. You can do the same with the Relate Inspire, but have them be the main star and they're talking to their audience. Okay, what do these individuals bring to society? And that is very simple. They have the ability to bring a lot of peace, a lot of harmony, a lot of tranquility, and just this wonderful desire to have this very nice cooperative environment involving all the people involved. So you can see that we have a very interesting disposition here. They tend to, if they're not overly sensitive about themselves, and if they don't get their feelings hurt too much, they can be a pleasure to be with, and they're always trying to bring that harmony there. As long as they don't go overboard and people start thinking, get your nose out of my business, we don't want your advice, because that can happen too if you're too aggressive with it. But for the most part, they bring happiness harmony and tranquility to the environment that they're in. Alrighty, that should take care of relate, inspire, and let's go on to the next disposition, okay? Alrighty, now we're on to our last disposition, and that is thinking, creating, and that's the desire of the person to create. Now what they want to do, now their close cousin is that person with the disposition of invent, but the think, create, what they're looking to do is to find new solutions to common everyday situations or problems. Okay, whereas the invent might be to create something brand new. We're just looking at a different answer, a different approach, a new approach. And they'll use real life issues as a basis for what they would consider inspirational and thought-provoking ideas. Now, generally, these individuals that think, create, they kind of trend toward philosophy, math, the arts, and science, whereas they can bring new ideas to those particular areas. And what's very fascinating is that they can bring a lot of great perspectives to new problems, and they can have a lot of fun doing it. But here's some of the characteristics of this particular disposition. One is they like to daydream. They can spend hours thinking and looking at things and daydreaming about solutions. Now again, this tends to follow the attention deficit model, and woof, there goes the pharmaceutical, there goes the death of that inner soul. So again, daydreaming is quite common among this particular dispositional behavior. Another issue is they will really get so involved in their projects, like the invent person, that they'll get lost in time. And 20 seconds, 20 minutes, 20 hours. I'm being facetious here, but there's no difference at all. So realize that their intent when they're late is, hey, I did not intend to be malicious. I did not intend to hurt you, but I just got so involved. Now, one of the things that you have to worry about is that when they get so involved in their projects, they may tend to forget to do certain things, or they may sacrifice relationships. Particularly, let's say that if you're a dad and you're really involved in your creative project, you may accidentally miss your son's soccer game or your daughter's ballet lesson. That can hurt that relationship with your family, so you got to use caution there. And we as parents of think, create individuals need to provide them with some tools to make them realize that they got to keep track of time and keep track of those relationships. Okay, they also tend to be somewhat shy and quiet. And an example of that, they can be so reclusive that it can be harmful. Look at Howard Hughes, highly gifted in the area of think, create, but rather reclusive in his personal life. So again, that involvement in their ideas takes away from the other aspects of life that are equally important, because don't forget, real life requires balance, and if we understand all these different dispositions, we can add that balance to bring harmony, not separation and conflict. Okay, most think, create individuals do not like schedules, because a schedule equals time constraint. Time constraint means they're not allowed to have that free-flowing mental attitude and that creative pursuit of finding that new solution, that new answer. And then what really is important is that they can get depressed easily if by some chance they don't feel that you, the parent, or you, society, acknowledge that their projects are important, that they've come up with something very thought-provoking or philosophically fantastic or artistically wonderful. So again, try to always acknowledge their successes, and that will really go a long way in preventing a depressing or time of depression for them, or rejection, which can also affect their family relationships and the relationships with their friends. Now, what motivates them is that they are open-minded, that they're creative, they require a lot of observation, and they are artistic. Those are some of the quickie characteristics. Now, how do we apply this to their academic pursuits? Well, this is where, for instance, let's say you have an assignment and you want to have a written assignment. Well, take another look at the requirement of written, and maybe instead of a written document or a written essay, just like the performer, you allow them to do a movie video. Do the same with the Think Create. Allow them to express themselves in their own universe of philosophical talks, or maybe a video or artistic expression of what they're trying to learn. Because again, don't forget, these become a multi-sensory approach to learning about different things. So we can be creative in how we utilize academics with a Think Create person, and let them help you create options that would allow them to learn their math, their science, their history, whatever, in a more creative and utilizing the environment of time freedom, lack of restrictions, and also always acknowledge what they're doing, and you'll have a very, very excited and motivated learner on your hands. Okay, well, that should take care of us now on the last disposition. Okay, now we've concluded our presentations on dispositions, or as I commonly call it, your child or yourself, your learning personality. Don't forget, these dispositions are extremely important in understanding how your child likes to learn. And once you learn about that and understand it, and you start to relate it and see the cross references to modalities and talents and interests and even the environment, then what we're going to have is a formula for you, or you'll have the formula where you can really have an outstanding educational environment for your family, allowing you to have a very, very nice, harmonious, successful homeschool environment. Okay, thank you very much, and off to the next videos.